another fantastic evening in Jasper's Tavern. I want to start by thanking Kathleen and Phil for selflessly manning and womaning this bar and keeping the doors open on such an important night for democracy in Newport and other towns. Speaking of Tipsy Talks, it reminds me in 1774 in Boston, they were in a pub talking about how to usurp the dictatorship of the king in England, and I imagine that they had a pint in their hand. So just channel that. Think of the ye old Union Oyster House when you are drinking your mead or your brew. So tonight we have three fantastic guests, two stories. One will be a duel, a husband and wife duel. We'll see who has the most charisma and charm and stage presence. But we're not going to embellish them anymore because they're second. First, we're going to hear from Steve Mason. Steve is going to take us on a trip down memory lane, telling us about the days and the nights in the riotous Newport City downtown circa 1950.
May she live again.
May she live again. So I think it's a really poignant theme for today and tonight, and I hope you stick around through both talks because we're going to have some pizzas coming in from Hoagie's, and we're going to celebrate the election results after the series. So, first up is Steve. Welcome him to the stage, please.
So thank you for that round of applause and for the introduction, Patrick. I wanted to do this because it's not nostalgia. It's the way things were, if you will. Not a movie, just the title. It's incredibly important to me because looking back on it, having traveled around the world during my career and spent many years in Washington, D.C., everything came back to Newport. The experiences that I had in Newport helped prepare me for what I had to do in life. And I'm gonna ask everybody, this is a hard thing to do in a bar, so I'm going to do it in two ways. I want everybody that hasn't been drinking to close your eyes for about 8 seconds. Everybody that's been drinking, don't do that because you won't be back. So I'm going to do it with you. You have to trust me. This isn't a magic act. Give me 8 seconds with your eyes closed, and I want you to think of only one thing, and that is what it was like for you between age 5 and 11, because that's where I was when the stories I'm going to tell you happened. So 8 seconds starting now. Okay. So I was actually born on Cottage Street, but I didn't spend more than a year there, and I don't remember that year. When I was just about 1 year old, my parents moved into an apartment on Bayview Street. It was a building. My grandfather owned 3 apartment buildings on Bayview Street, and my grandfather was going to pop up from time to time in the stories because he was essential to my growing up, and that was my mother's father. And we're going to walk up Bayview Street, and originally I intended to go down the northern side, this side of Main Street, and then up, and then I figured, well, let's just start at the corner of Bayview Street and see how far we get. So I had 3 childhood friends. I say friends because we fished together. Now you can never trust somebody you fish with, you know that. So I love Billy and the rest of the guys, but I pretty much grew up with old people. And so that sort of puts a certain light on the way I viewed life as a 5 or 6 or 7-year-old. And I had, the majority of my friends were on Main Street. They had shops, and they were much older. And so I learned from them, and a lot. And I was talking to Mr. Kuchar before, and his father gave me my first haircut. And I'll tell you, grandfather. When you get to be my age, you can't remember if your father, grandfather. But I had my first haircut in his barbershop. So walking up Bayview Street, we had an interesting family on the left-hand side with the Auger family. Now, maybe somebody would remember this, but Mr. Auger, Maurice, I won't mention people who are still alive's name to protect the innocent, but Mr. Auger was one of the flying Augers. He was an incredible acrobat, but he had to find another line of business. He had a family, but he was an incredible athlete, the first real athlete I ever knew. He would do exercises that an acrobat would do in his small apartment on Bayview Street, and I was just amazed. He had these things he would do to get, but his daughter, Linda, and I went to school together. We went to the Catholic school, and that's a different issue. I'll mention from time to time the difference in 1950s Newport on religious grounds, because there was a deep religious line even in this town. And I don't say that detrimentally. Everybody got along, but you could definitely feel it. And primarily the Catholics in this town were Canadian, were French, and everybody else wasn't, and that's the way it was. So the Flying Augers he'd tell great stories about him and his brothers, and they had a tragedy in the family during a performance, and that was very, very fun to hear as a 6-year-old and to reflect on. And then my friend Doug and Alan lived across the street, and they moved to California when I was in 8th grade. But you get to the corner of Main Street, and then there used to be a furniture store. The big store that was the dollar store, that was a furniture store. And just down beyond that, towards School Street, was a huge cathedral church. And I was in the bushes the night that church burned, because I watched it burn. And the heat was tremendous. I was visiting with my friend Tommy Cahill, who lived on School Street, and his mother had a hedge in front of her house. And the mother told me, "You better get home. It looks like a fire across the street," and the fire trucks were showing up. And I started to leave, and when she shut the door, I hid behind the little brush that was in front of the house, and I watched the whole fire until the heat got so intense, even across the street, that I decided it was time to move on. And my mother, when I got home, was worried because she knew there was a fire and I wasn't home. But that was one of the first real big things that I remember in Newport. Crossing the street to 3rd Street, there was a filling station like there is now, but it was an Esso station back then. Exxon was later. And I used to go there a lot and watch the people put air in their tires, and it was kind of fun. My grandfather, I knew a lot about cars even at 5 years old. I don't want to take too much credit, but I paid attention. My grandfather had an auto body business. He was the first really trained auto body, they called them auto body mechanics back then, in the state, because he spent 4 years in Detroit working for the Fisher Body Company. He was born in Sherbrooke, and my grandmother was born in Lennoxville, in Canada, just a little bit, it's really a suburb of Sherbrooke. Sherbrooke was a much bigger, much more important town back in the early part of the last century. Anyways, I would watch people filling their tires with air, and some people, would not put the cap back on. So there used to be, when they built the parking lot, the big parking lot just by the lake here, one day, because somebody was complaining about the fact that they were missing, this was a bad on me, they were missing the caps on their tires. So I went down with a bucket. What did I do? I took the caps off of all of the cars. I brought them to the filling station, and I told the filling station operator, I want to give these to you in case people come and they don't have caps. Of course, many people showed up. My dad knew the gas station owner, and finally they connected, because my dad worked for my grandfather in the body shop. My dad grew up on a farm in Albany, so he was a farmer, but he loved cars, and so it was perfect. And he eventually owned his own business until he retired. So the Esso station, or Exxon now, was there. Then the first post office was actually where the court is now. That was a post office. It was a beautiful post office. Had marble floors and brass fixtures in front of the postal workers. It was very official. Postal workers had official-looking clothing, and I used to go up there because on a hot summer day, it was the coolest place in Newport because of the marble. And I'd sit on the marble. It was nice and cold, and I'd watch the people. And the one thing I should say, that back then, everybody looked after everybody. And I can't even begin to tell you what that means. It means that everybody I met, whether I knew them or not, were actually looking at me and wondering if I was going to be safe. And I'll tell you a story a little later on that occurred at the railroad station, which was my second favorite place to walk to. I'd take the railroad tracks down to the railroad station, and the railroad station used to be an incredibly busy place. It's hard to imagine now, and my grandfather would say it was even busier than that in the 20s, or maybe even in the teens. But I'd walk down to the railroad station. I'm diverting now. I'm going to leave Upper Main Street. And I would sit in the railroad station on these beautiful benches, and the ticket master would be giving out tickets, and he would be looking at me every once in a while. And I remember one day I was sitting there, and a fella got off the train. He had a long coat on. It was probably fall, I'd say. And he came over, and he asked me a few questions. I don't remember what the questions were, but the ticket master got out from behind his booth, and he came over, and he said, "Can I help you?" to the guy. And the guy just walked away. That's how it was. Mm-hmm. That's how kids grew up feeling secure.
Did you
As-
run a store? Did you run a store at one point?
No, the story about me running a store, I ran a store for about 5 minutes. I'm going to say a name, Jerry Schweenard. Jerry was a, well, really nice guy. He was a friend of my grandfather's too. And he ran a shoe shop. He did shoe repair and shoe sales across the street, right next to Phelps Drug Store, which is at the corner of Central and Main. Very popular place. It would be full after school. The high school students who were then, the high school was on School Street, and Newport High School would let out, and the Sacred Heart kids would come down, and everybody would be together. And I went into Jerry's one day. My grandfather sent me with a nickel to buy a long strand of leather. He used to have them hanging up behind him, behind the cash register. And I went in one day, and I said, can I have a lace? It was a leather lace. And they came in like 72 inches. I mean, there were no 12, 36, it's all 72. And it was a nickel. And so he said, sure, but just a minute. I have to get a coffee down at Phelps, just, the next place over. And he said, will you watch the store for me? And he said, come back. I was 7 years old. And he said, now, you don't worry about the cash register. You don't have to use it. But if somebody comes in and you can't help them, you write their name down on one of these pieces of paper. And when I get back from getting my coffee, I'll follow up with them. Because everybody knew everybody. And, it was an incredible thing. But so I was standing behind the counter of the shoe store, and he was at Phelps. How many customers did I get? None. None. No, thank God, because who knows what would have happened. But Jerry came back and he said, well, how'd it go? And I said, well, we didn't have any customers. He said, it's not your fault. It's a slow day. He said, I want to tell you how much I appreciate. And he gave me the nickel back.
Good place to grow up.
Good place. Good people.
How many shoe stores did you have?
Well, there was two. There was Endicott Johnson, which many of you might remember, anybody that's older than 60. And that's where, if any of you know Tony Primeau, who was the richest man in Vermont, started out in Endicott Johnson selling shoes. And my grandfather used to tell a story that my father told me. My grandfather was a great dresser, spiffy dresser. And he loved his shoes, he loved a suit. He used to buy his shoes at Endicott Johnson. And Tony Primeau, and Tony and I had this conversation, God bless him, when he was alive, because he loved Newport. He did a lot for Newport. The park is named after him. But my grandfather went to get a pair of shoes, and Tony had just started selling shoes. And he was from Barton originally. So Newport was a big city for him and selling shoes. And my grandfather went back to the shop, and he said, well, that shoe guy, he ain't gonna amount to nothing. and Tony said, well, your grandfather was wrong. Certainly, he did that. But, so going back up Main Street, my mother was worked for the telephone company back when they had telephone exchanges, like change the plugs. And there's an old exchange machine in the Goodrich Library on the second floor if you want to see what and that's what my mother worked at. So when I get done school, at 6 years old, I could walk from Sacred Heart downtown, and I would wait at Goodrich Library for my mom to get off work across the street. And that's the main reason that I am a trust. I've been a trustee at the library for 20 years now, and the reason is I feel so strongly about that place. There's one of the windows that's named for my mother because she also volunteered, because back then if somebody did something for somebody, you didn't offer to pay him. That was really important. You did something in return, a thing, either time or an effort, but you never offered to pay. My grandfather would not, if he did a favor for somebody, he would not take money. And my grandfather loved money. But he made a lot of it. He made his first money in Prohibition, and I'm not ashamed to tell you that being Canadian, he didn't recognize the American law that prevented people from buying a drink. And so when I'd ask him about it, he would say, that was somebody's law, it wasn't mine. Although we did get a number of warnings because he developed what's now called smoke screen, a device that you could mount under your car, connect to your exhaust, and it would blow engine oil onto the exhaust. And the police came down to his shop one day, when his shop was here, and said, if you sell one more of those, you're going to jail. So he did. He said, then I stopped selling. He had a big Chris Craft boat that he kept under the lakeside motel. There used to be a beautiful motel on the water on the bay, and they had great food, and my grandfather was very good friends with the owners, very nice people. They lived up on Pine Hill. And
Is this at Poolin?
it's where Pauline's is now, just beyond it.
Okay.
It used to be it went under different names as time went on, but I remember it as the Lakeside. Very classy place back then. There were all kinds of places to eat on Main Street.
Frank's Steakhouse.
You know, we had Frank's Steakhouse, which was where I had my first official job at 12 years old. I was a dishwasher at Frank's Steakhouse. I hadn't gotten that far down Main Street, but thank you for that. Frank Lachance was, again, a gentleman. Taught me a lot of lessons. My son is an executive chef in Atlanta, and I like to think that the stories I told him about the restaurant industry and working for Frank for 3.5 years. I would just wash dishes. I'd get $1 a day, and I thought that was pretty good actually. At 12 years old, and so I had $5 at the end of the week. That felt pretty good. Then my good friend, my best friend, who lived on Central Street, Phil, he also got a job working there, and we worked our way up. You know, it was corporate America to us. We started out as dishwashers, but boy, we went to the top. I ended up making his famous coleslaw, which had to be made exactly the way Frank told you to make it. You had to make it in the freezer, a walk-in. He had a cut-off beer barrel, and you mixed it in like this. Now, anybody that knows anything about cold and vinegar knows that it makes cold a lot colder. But he had all the ingredients, and we had to mix it. And so we had to do it in the walk-in. But that was fun. He taught me how to make whipped cream. So as you can see, I was working my way up. But the best part about it was lunch, because I could have whatever was on the menu for lunch. Or as a dishwasher, I get to see a lot of good seconds, I call them. I know that technically weren't just seconds, but somebody would leave mostly a whole steak, a fillet, And Frank's was known for his steak. It was a steakhouse. So I learned a lot there, working there. Had a lot of fun. My next job was another fun job, and that was up on East Main, and I know that's not on Main Street, but Main Street was sort of a continuation. I worked for Natoli Motor Company. Anybody that remembers Natoli's, my father got me the job. I'll tell you a funny story. Well, at least that was funny for me. John Natoli was a great, again, the older people in this town were just wonderful with kids. I was 15 years old, working at a car dealership, and I was a car freak. So, I mean, what else could there be, right? I was washing cars. I had a background in washing. I'd done dishes. So it was 1966, and that was a big year for Mopar, Dodge, Plymouth. Had some great cars. The Charger came out in 1966, and they got a black Charger with a red pinstripe. A beautiful car. And John Natoli's office was on above the where the mechanics work. It was on the same level as the parts department. His window opened up onto the where cars were washed, and John came down, and he said, "You're doing a good job. First of all, you're doing a great job. How many times have you watched that Charger?" All the other, he said, "See all those other cars? They're all dirty." I fixated on that car because I was allowed to drive them to the washing area and back to the line. He said, "The car's going to have so many miles on it, I'll have to sell it. I'll have to sell it as used." But yeah, I would have probably still be working there. Of course, they're long gone. But when I turned 16, a friend of mine, a very close friend of mine, Dave Azor, who some of you may know, Dave and Franny and George were close friends. But we're getting into my teenage years. I got to get back.
Did you ever have peanuts on Main Street?
Yes, so that's a good question. So J.J. Newberry's, I don't know if some of you do remember Newberry's, but they had a big carton, box, about yay big, full of peanuts for the summer. And for a penny, a handful of peanuts, right? So I was 10 years old at that time. And we had a new kid, my friend Phil, my best friend Phil, who's still my best friend. He lives out by Syracuse, New York. He was new in town, and he came up to Main Street. And a bunch of us guys who met on Main Street were getting a handful of peanuts. And I looked across the street, and I saw Phil, and he was just hanging out on the corner. And it was the summer, so he hadn't started school yet. It turned out that he moved from Albany to Newport. His father took a job at Ethan Allen, sold a farm. And farming is a whole different issue. I'd love to get into that, but I saw him standing there, and there was something about Phil. And I realized it was the size of his hands. Wait a minute. A penny for those hands? So I motioned him to come over. I didn't even know his name. He came across the street, and I think I introduced myself as Stephen. I said, "You know, they sell peanuts for a penny a handful," and Phil said, "I don't have a penny." I said, "I got a penny." So Phil's hands were so big, even at that age, that he could get twice as many peanuts as most of the kids did. Well, the first thing you know, Phil had a job, he would stand in front of Newberry's, and you know, if a kid walked in, he'd say to Phil, "Will you get me a penny's worth?" And Phil would get some of the, you know, he wouldn't give him all the peanuts. Phil get some peanuts. So that's how Phil and I became friends, lifetime friends. And the manager at Newberry's, because my mom at that point in time was working at Newberry's behind the lunch counter. They had a great lunch counter. And during lunch in Newport, the Newberry's lunch counter would be packed. And I loved lime rickeys. And if you don't know what a lime rickey is, it's just soda with limes in it. And on a hot day, it really hits the spot. And it came in a special glass, a tall green glass. So my mother, at one point in time, my mother said, because you get to keep the glass. Can you imagine this? So you get a lime rickey in this tall glass, you get to enjoy it, and then you get to keep the glass. My mother said, "I have no more cupboard space. It's full of them damn glasses." Mom would compass a complimentary glass whenever we needed it, me and Phil. So we'd get our peanuts, we'd sit there eating peanuts, drinking lime rickey. Yeah. So, you know the Joey, so there used to be a grocery store the Bouffards owned underneath the big block. You had to walk down in, and it was there. And yes, my mom did a lot of shopping there. And once we went there, and the Bouffards were very nice people. I ended up going to school with Kathy, who passed a few years ago, and her brother Denny. French, in French, if you're named Dennis, it's D-I-N-I-S. It's not N-N-I-S, and you call him Denny, not Dennis. I stray. So my mother went there, and my father didn't drink, but one of my uncles was going to visit that evening. So my dad said, "We need to have some beer for Larry." Larry was his youngest brother, and he'd like to drink. So my mother bought beer, and she felt uncomfortable buying the beer. I got you. Yeah, sorry. So my mother bought a six-pack of whatever it was, and Mr. Bouffard said to my mother, "But you're buying beer. You never buy beer." And I said, "It's my dad. My dad likes it." And my mother was so embarrassed she had to leave the beer there. She grabbed me by the arm, dragged me out, and she said, "Don't you ever say that in front of people, even if it was true," she said. My last story, I could go on. I wanted to tell you because there was some talk about places, drinking places of ill repute in Newport, and we had one. And I'm going to take out my last 5 minutes with a story. It was called the Snake Pit. Now, when you're 7, 8 years old and you hear the word snake pit, you got to see it, right? And it was notorious. In fact, Newport's only murder took place in the snake pit. And my grandfather used to tell me the story. It was actually the chief of police who was killed in the snake pit. He went down to ask a few questions to the wrong people. My grandfather would say, he asked the wrong people a question. And they shot him.
Oh, right.
Yeah, dead.
What year was that?
Oh, in the 20s. Yeah.
Where?
Where what?
Where's the snake pit?
In the heart.
Oh, okay, underneath the hotel.
Which one?
We used to have this great, beautiful, big old hotel on Main Street.
Where the bank is?
Yeah, that area. And it was it was the hotel, but then there were many offices. There was a pool hall. That was also interesting. There was a pool hall, and there was your insurance company where Mr. Horvath got his I don't know if any of you know Chad. His father was an insurance man back in the 30s, and he worked for a big company, an insurance company. He worked there. And there was a grocery store in that building. There were, I think I counted 8 grocery stores in Newport at one time. 8. So I was enamored by this place. I walked by the snake pit, and you had to look down because it was below ground. It was a snake pit. And I'd hang out on the corner waiting for people to come out because I wanted to see what kind of people frequented a place called the snake pit. Well, it turns out, and I'm going to try and be quick, my grandfather was in the snake pit the night the Prohibition ended. And he wrote me a letter. I have the letter. I was in college then. I went to St. Mike's College, and I went to graduate school in Washington, D.C. But he wrote me a letter about that last night, what it was like. He said, I had my last illegal beer. And it was a momentous occasion for him. You got to realize, here I am, a freshman in college, and my grandfather writes to me, and the only thing he can think to write about is the night that Prohibition ended. And what a joyful night it was. And he said, him and his buddies, and he had a lot of buddies, and most of them were ended up well-to-do people. Mr. Blake, who ended up being Senator Blake, was the mayor of Newport at one time. And his son ended up being in city government for a lifetime, really. They were all sitting at the same table. Picture this, sitting at the same table at the snake pit. And he said, we sat there all night until we drank the last drop of illegal beer. Thank you.
How many years had it been since the end of Prohibition until when he wrote you that letter?
Well, Prohibition ended in the early 30s.
Yeah.
And I started at St. Mike's in 1969.
So he was still thinking about it.
And so it was still on his mind, yeah. And my grandfather loved his beer, and there's all kinds of stories about that, but some of them probably shouldn't be told, although my grandfather's long gone. But he would have loved to hear. This was his, this was his business. And this is where the radiator shop was. And back in the day, there are stories of, radiators used to be very, how shall I say?
Ornate.
Ornate. They were behind a, that's another story.
Happy to help.
But they often failed. And so you needed a radiator shop. A radiator shop actually was a very busy place. And so he had an auto body shop upstairs and a radiator shop down here. And we're sitting in the radiator shop. I came down. It was still a radiator shop when I was a teenager. My grandfather didn't own it, but there used to be an auto supply store, Newport Auto Supply. I don't know if any of you remember that upstairs. And Win Hammond, who had worked with my dad at my grandfather's business, was the radiator guy. And Win was an incredible person. If anything I would like you to take away from this is the importance that adults are to young children. It's I think it still exists. I met 2 kids today that I judge science fairs for the school out in Lowell. I was on the school board for 19 years out there, and I like to judge events. And I saw one kid entered a sawhorse. And now I know that sounds simple, but this kid put a lot of work into this sawhorse. It was really nice. He's tested how much weight it would hold, and I saw a sawhorse on the internet that was really quite extraordinary. And I walked up to him and I said, I don't know if you remember, yeah, you judged my sawhorses. And I said, yes, yes. And I said, well, I took a picture of this sawhorse. Do you think you could make one of those? And he said, send me that picture. I want to make that. So I think we can still make a difference. I really do. There's a lot of distractions in the world. Kids have a lot of things going on. But I think they still appreciate time spent with someone who cares.
Steve makes me realize that there are so many people in this area that we need to like start an oral history tour of. I'm thinking like, you know, Newport and stars, you know, like some sort of, get those big flood lamps up on the clouds at night and just have all the elders come down and tell us of the days before that. Those stories are gone because they're not written down. So thankfully, only Heather is responsible for recording them on video. So thank you, NEK-TV. This is the first time I've met Ellie, but I've pedaled with Bob, and I'm really excited to hear about their excursions and experiences in Africa. Probably a long time ago, perhaps, maybe.
It's all relative.
I'm suspicious of. Thank you, and it's all yours.
Hi y'all. We're not going to tell you all about Africa. We're going to tell you about just a little brief piece. When we came to this area 34 years ago, when I interviewed with the group I joined, I said to them, in about 10 years or so, we're going to go somewhere else for a while to work, because I knew I wanted to bring my family, and they said, yeah, okay. And then one day it's time for a scheduling meeting. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to Africa next year. And they're like, for a year? Like, yeah, we're going to leave in June. Wait, that's summer. Okay, we'll leave in August. We got it whittled down from a year. Ended up being just over 4 months. But that's how it goes. It was a lifelong dream, and now seems a long time ago, but not so long. It was
Almost 20 years ago.
15? No.
No, more like closer to 20, if you're rounding.
Time flies. Okay, anyway, moving right on here. Here's an interesting thing I didn't know. The laser pointer won't shine on a TV screen. So I'll just point with my finger. Africa, the Rift Valley, the continental plates are pulling apart right there, and it creates volcanoes all along there, and the equator goes right here. Volcanoes spew up fertile soil. So fertile soil, equator, and rain equals lots of food, which means lots of people. So this shows you the population densities of the Rift Valley near the equator, including Kenya. And so those population densities are higher than the population density of New York through there. So what looks rural isn't rural the way we think of it here. Here's Kenya. The Brits, when they arrived, basically kept going up until they got high enough to escape malaria in Nairobi. And so these are all elevations that are at this magic level that used to not have malaria. Only malaria parasites have evolved and figured out how to deal with those cooler temperatures, and so now it's full of malaria anyway. We were heading to, I landed a job with a Methodist hospital in Maua, Kenya, which is very close to Meru. So our family, after a brief stop in Europe, we started heading for Nairobi from Italy. And then we realized we're flying over Kilimanjaro, which is in Tanzania, which is south of Kenya. We shouldn't have been flying over Kilimanjaro. It meant that there was a plane with a flat tire in the middle of the runway in Nairobi, so we got delayed. Fairly typical.
Yeah.
Anyway, we did make it to Nairobi there, and basically even though we were many hours late, our driver dutifully waited. We're going from Nairobi, heading for Meru, which is near Mount Kenya, and then our village was in these foothill mountains there. So there's Nairobi, busy, hectic city. Matatus. Get used to the idea of matatus. I think they'll eventually make it to the U.S. You know, minivans with a tout that are constantly changing their routes. That's how you get around. We had a minivan pick us up. We're heading down the roads. This is the highway from Nairobi heading that way. The highways are lined with people trying to sell their stuff almost everywhere. That's kind of the look of Africa right there. There's a look of Africa also. That's talent. Guess what's in the crates?
Chickens?
Eggs.
Oh. So
Yeah.
which came first?
Right.
Okay, so this is getting closer to Meru and Maua, and very beautiful landscape. And here's a striking thing. You know, we found it was kind of muddy everywhere, and within 5 minutes of walking around, we'd be muddy. And the Kenyans were spectacularly clean and well dressed all the time. She came out of one of these little hovels, and that's, you know, how people look. That's Maua, seen from a hill nearby. Maua had gone from being like 15,000 people to maybe 100,000 in the span of a generation or two, which has completely disrupted society and the way people live. So everything is changing fast. The hospital, you're catching a piece of the hospital over in this corner. So this is Maua, which is about a mile high on the equator, which means pretty much every day it's sunny and 80 degrees. it's sort of, yeah, it's maybe 78, 80 degrees. It's a really nice place. There was a rainy season that was unusually dry the year we were there, so it wasn't so obvious to us that it was monsoon season. There just was a little more rain then. This is across the street from the hospital, that same look, with some cows hanging out also, just to make the Vermonters feel at home. This is people trying to sell their farm produce, which there was all of about 3 or 4 things that people grew. But if you throw out the seed in the ground, it would grow fast and big. Sukuma wiki is the name for kale. And because more kale must be better than less kale, if you were going to sell your kale, you waited until the kale leaves were really big and leathery. because more is good. So just a different standard.
There's a small irony of kale. We could not get. We tried to do everything to that kale to eat it. You know, we ate it like it was spinach. We cooked it. And just couldn't get used to it until we came back to the United States. And now kale's one of our favorite vegetables.
Harvest it a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is going into the hospital, the Maua Methodist Hospital. The chapel where you had to go every morning for a service before you started because it was a Methodist hospital. There were 4 wards, the adult ward, obstetrics, children's, and a surgical ward. The obstetrical ward in this small hospital had 3 times as many deliveries per year as the entire state of Vermont. That was our cottage, which was really pretty nice. It was, you know, just a couple rooms, but we were pretty darn happy there, surrounded by flowers all the time like that.
Maua means flower, by the way.
Yeah. And this was the equivalent of a Kenyan robin. I don't remember the name of it, but they were everywhere. They were just, you know, you didn't think anything about them. These were the doctors I was working with there. Can you guess which one is the Vermont doctor?
The guy with the beard.
Exactly right. This
guy, Suma, was the chief resident there. One of the best doctors I've ever worked with. Great guy. So it was busy days there, very busy place. There's the children's ward. There were basically, it would usually be 3 families per bed. There was 4 or 5 diseases that accounted for 90% of the work. Malaria, HIV, TB. The combination of TB and HIV in particular is devastating. It's just heartbreaking. There's almost no way to get ahead of that with the resources we had there. nonetheless, most people we did make better and send home, and things as simple as dehydration and just IV fluids and that kind of thing went a long ways. Here's another feature of Maua. Those are khat trees called mara in Kenyan. Does anybody know what khat is?
Yeah.
So, yeah, you chew it. So khat is a mild stimulant, sort of kind of like chewing on coca leaves. And there's a big market for it in the Middle East. And it's very valuable, and you basically have to get those stems and then race and get them to market as quick as you can, which meant getting them onto a plane to fly them to the Middle East. And it stimulated fast money in the area, which stimulated bars.
And violence.
And violence. If you happen to be on someone else's land, picked a khat stem from there, they would just cut off your hand.
Oh, nice.
That was kind of the standard thing to do. There, we dealt with a lot of machete injuries. Violence against women is an unfortunate feature everywhere in the world, but bad in Africa. If you had HIV, if you were a prostitute in Africa, you had a good chance of having HIV, and if people knew you had HIV, they might stone you until just a few years earlier. Once there began to be treatment, it was changing. These women were all women who were effectively treated for HIV, and they were going off to give this little song and dance about how it was okay to come forward so you could get treated. So lots of hope, lots of positive things happening while we were there. The economy of Kenya was absolutely improving during the time we were there. U.S. aid, you may have heard something about that, how inefficient and bankrupt and stupid it is. So G.W. Bush actually was the president that started PEPFAR, President's Emergency Program for AIDS Relief. And this goes to show you just how inefficient it was. Looking at those couple of years when PEPFAR came in, the number of people being treated effectively for HIV went from hundreds of thousands to several million in just the span of a year or two. One of the most effective health programs there's ever been on the planet. Just had to throw that in. Couldn't resist. I'll turn this over to Ellie for a while. I was working in the hospital. Ellie.
And I volunteered in a school that was a little bus ride away. You'd take one of those matatus up the hills and go to this school a few days a week. It was it was a boarding school, as most of the schools were, and it went from grades 1 to 8. You can change this. So that is the campus of the school. Beautiful also, and they would have a big, I don't know how to use that, big morning meeting every morning outside. Everything was outside. So there was like the morning meeting, the headmaster talking to the students, and it was also a church-based school, so lots of Bible study stuff going on, quotes and such. And you can see it's really beautiful. When they would be having one of these meetings, this is just a funny sidebar, and a rain cloud would come over, and start to rain, and everybody would run because their clothing was all hanging up outside to dry, and they would just abandon the meeting and go to grab their clothes. It was kind of surprising. Again, you might be able to figure out which one is the Vermont teacher there. Although I have to say, when we came back and did a few of these little talks, I do remember being in Brownington and showing that picture and saying, "Do you see me in that picture?" And some kids going, "Where are you?" Because my hair had whitened up a bit since then. I was like, really? They had some computers that was like they were museum pieces. They spent the entire semester talking about the computer and how you would touch the computer, and they were under plastic all the time. And then when somebody was coming in to take a picture, they actually let the kids on the computer. But obviously electricity was come and go, right? There was a little Wi-Fi, what do you call those, cafe, in that little area that he showed with all the cows in the front that we would go over every day, and about 5 times a day the internet would go down because our kids were with us and they were doing their schoolwork and sending it in on internet, but it was not very reliable.
Hit and miss.
Uh,
The name of your school was?
The Nyambene Primary School.
Yes, and that's, that peak in the distance there is Nyambene Peak, which was the highest point. So we were at about a mile, and that's like 8,200 feet. So we worked a lot, but we get out for walks, short walks on the day, and on the weekends we try to go for longer walks, and we kind of had an itch to get to the top of that. So we kept walking.
The Royal Week.
Yeah. There's our kids who are along, including our kids at 9th and 11th grade, and before we went, Jenna made it clear that we were ruining her life by doing this. She was about to start her freshman year in high school, but she did come around.
Yeah.
So
In fact, she's the only one who's been back there.
that's true. She went back, right. These are our Danish friends who are giants, apparently. Who are also Charlotte was a doctor that was working there as well. She was a student, actually. So we were kind of gradually getting further away from campus and trying to get closer to Nyambene, which had this allure. And this is it was tea. Besides Marat, tea is the major crop, and the tea fields are just gorgeous. That's a tea field there.
But wait, another sidebar is that it was a British colony, and they had this really fertile soil, and they could feed themselves, but the Brits made them pull everything. They had to grow tea. Tea was the only thing that could grow in this valley because that was where they were going to make their money, and it's just another one of those little travesties of
the cash crop.
Yeah.
So we're getting further, and as you get up the mountain, it became, closer to being like rainforest, and it was pretty beautiful, and it would get wilder and wilder. It's where the water was. There was actually a big water supply project for the town of Moa that this Italian monk had come and created about 20 years earlier. In Africa, all the big wildlife, the things that you expect to see, lions, tigers, all that stuff, not tigers. Lions, leopards,
buffalo.
all the different kinds of ungulates, all that stuff, they're in the national parks. Basically, they were hunted out generations ago from anywhere that wasn't protected. So, but there was this kind of, the odd little small wildlife things that we would see, and, all exotic. The one exception was elephants, because it's kind of hard to get elephants to obey a fence. That occasionally, when we were making we would make a trip to Meru, which was about 40 miles away by Matatu, once every couple of weeks to get more supplies, and occasionally elephants would be crossing the road, and even the Kenyans were totally into it. If there was an elephant crossing the road, everybody's peeled up to the windows, looking for the elephant, because you didn't see them that often.
They were kind of like moose around here. They're cool to see, but you don't really want them in your
Yeah,
backyard.
cool to see until they were pulling up your garden,
Yeah.
right, walking through your house. And that's more of the wildlife out there. So that's it looks so rural, but I know this as a runner. If I was running around and I was trying to find a deserted piece of woods to go take a leak in, good luck, because there was a house within 20 feet of you everywhere. Even though it looks thickly forested, there were people everywhere.
How were the snakes?
What's that?
Were there snakes?
Not so much.
It was good.
Not so much.
That was in Newport,
again, it was
snake pit.
there were so many people. They had basically, the snake pit. That's right. It all been moved to the snake pit. So we're walking around trying to get closer, and one day we're on a walk in this, a smaller village up high, and I don't have good pictures of this because we weren't taking it on our camera, but everyone was super friendly. Everyone we dealt with, you saw all the smiles everywhere. They're just kind of a naturally happy people.
And because we were the wildlife.
That's true. We were the most exotic thing in Maua, Kenya.
When we would walk around town or anywhere, or especially out in the hills, and little children would come running to the edge of their driveway. Mazungu, Mazungu! It was like they're calling everybody out. Look, there's some white people coming. We were like these exotics, and we'd be waving like we were in a Wizard of Oz.
So here's some Kiswahili for you. Mazungu is a white person. Wazungo is multiple white people. So that's what you do. So on this walk, it had already, you know, it had already been a little bit sour because, you know, most of the time, kids wouldn't really beg that much on the streets. Their mothers, you know, would like slapping her down. The exception would be, you know, the very sad thing. There would be glue kids. You'd see, you know, some 11-year-old hanging out with their Coke bottle that had glue in it, you know, just, you know, toasting their brain. And they would be, you know, the ones that would be pushy, begging a little more. And we tend to, you know, our friends have given us advice: carry little things of food with you so you can give that out. And so we do a little bit of that. But this particular group of little kids had been up in this one little community. It just had a different feel to it, and they were kind of like, we'd given them some stuff, and then you know, that was it. And then we're like, yeah, they want more, and they were kind of following us and yelling. And then all of a sudden, those little kids turn tail and run. And we look, and down the road, a couple hundred yards, there's this group of young men. They're kind of hooting and hollering, and they're in a pack. And you know, whether it's dogs or baboons or humans, you know, pack chemistry is different, right? And so this was a stag party, and these guys were basically out looking for trouble. And you know, a couple of them had these big masks. They were shaking up and down, and they're definitely, you know, at 11 in the morning, you know, wasted, drunk, and probably on Marat also. And so we're like, you know, we see them in distance, and right away there's just like that little chill, you know, like, this isn't good. We're kind of trying to figure out what to do. And we're kind of, we turn around trying to figure out, you know, do we go this way, you know, whatever. Anyway, this man, very nicely dressed man, probably about 50 years old, mid-50s, he kind of comes to us and says, oh, come with me. And he goes, and the nature of the little village there was everybody's house has a little gate, right? A little makeshift fence of sticks and a little gate. And he walks into the gate, whether it's his or not, I don't know, but he basically pulls us in with him quietly. And we hang out there and just hung. And luckily those guys, I don't think they had seen us, didn't notice. And they, you know, they kind of meander down, and eventually when they're gone, you know, then we can go back out. But so we're in a space like this, right, just in between houses, this little space just hanging there, and pretty afraid. But it was just, you know, it was so funny. You're talking about how people take care of each other, and when my friends ask, like, okay, well, how's it living in a rural area? I often think, well, it's because people know each other, and so you have this chain of connections that makes people be nicer to each other. But globally, you know, the kindness to strangers goes such a long way, and we were right that this was risky. Ellie,
When I went to school the next day, I was telling some of the teachers in the teachers' lounge, such as it was, about this event that happened, and you know, there was all this noise and whatever, and they were like, you saw that? If you ever see that again, run, that is dangerous, it's so dangerous. They were terrified for us, and I was like, wow, okay, our intuition was right on that one.
You know, and it's, you know, and we have it here in as we all know, we have it here in the kingdom. You know, just a year or two after we were here, we're driving down the road, get a flat. My jack, you know, I'm not, you know, I'm not a car guy, but I know how to change a tire. But you know, not when the jack doesn't work. You know, and this guy stops, who I recognize as one of my patients, of a family that's a very low functioning family. But he comes, hardly has a word, you know, he just comes out and is, you know, and bim bam boom, has my tire changed, drives off, you know, won't hear about it. I mean, I think and I hope all of you guys have had that experience. But it was profound, you know, this man, you know, just, and I don't know, you know, maybe nothing would have happened, who knows, but it really had an impact on us. These were what those homes look like. And
There's more kindness.
there's more kindness, yeah. So this, you can't see him so much. There was this kid named Gimson, who's one of those smart 12-year-olds who's trying to get ahead, and his English was really good, and he kind of befriended us, and at one point he says, "Oh yeah, my mom wants you to come over," so they invite us over to their little home and served us, I'm sure, the best food they'd eaten all year in this home, just being hospitable.
They were so generous and kind, like, they didn't have anything to give and they gave it all to us. It was unbelievable.
And Jenna had gone around and met a lot of these people, these families, met these families, and you can see they're pretty much just like us, except they have better teeth because they don't have any sugar. It is funny. There's there's these different ethnic. There's a couple of large ethnic divides in Kenya, and the Kikuyu and Kimeru are all people that have come sort of up, and they share the various forms of Kiswahili that they often speak, and have really good teeth, and very dark skin. And if you remember my slide of the doctors, the people the Nilotic people had come, like from Somalia and that way. They tend to be very beautiful people, but their teeth are terrible. It's just funny. It was so striking those differences. That little girl is about to die of measles. There was a pretty good vaccination program in Kenya, and the reason why people didn't get vaccinated was the same as here. Really stupid stories that circulate. If people didn't get vaccinated, that was why. It's in a bad case of measles. It still kills people in America, as happened in Texas 3 days ago. This little girl was one of our big triumphs. She had tetanus. Those tetanus shots you get. How many people have a fair idea of what tetanus does to you? Here, what's tetanus do to you?
Lockjaw.
Lockjaw. It causes painful paralysis. Your muscles aren't just paralyzed; they're paralyzed in spasm. Contracted, and it lasts basically until you grow new cells, because that toxin binds irreversibly to muscle cells. And so she was in painful paralysis like this for 3 or 4 months, with basically tube feeding is what we were doing to keep her alive, and treating pneumonia when it happened, and she survived it and left the hospital. So that was I would say maybe my proudest case there.
Do you remember her name?
I don't remember her name.
He doesn't remember my name.
So this is not really the story, but we did get to some of the national parks including Meru National Park. Does that ring any bells for anybody? Yeah. Born Free is in Meru National Park, 30 miles from where we were staying in this. Baboons are incredible nuisances, and can also kill you really easily. They're really strong and have big fangs. So we did get to see some pretty cool wildlife. This was kind of a fun one.
Wait, go back.
Yeah.
That's our lilac-breasted roller.
Where did I skip it? Where'd it go?
I don't know.
There.
Forward. There.
Oh, wow.
That's right. That was our prize picture. That's a lilac-breasted roller, which was pretty spectacular. Yes. That was what the landscape looked around when you looked out. Volcanic, right? Just these little volcanic basalt
Rough
peaks
looking
sticking
people.
out. Yeah.
Great family report.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. And that's Mount Kenya, the second tallest mountain in Kenya, which we did climb. We didn't do Kilimanjaro while we were there. That's part of that hike.
Is that gold?
Anyway,
Is that what?
That last picture?
Gold mining? No. It's rock breaking. That was what.
oh yeah, I was just trying to show like what people would do for an income. These guys are sitting around with a hammer beating on rocks to break them into small pieces because it was a job. Anyway, that's all.
We don't have a big finale.
Yeah, we don't.
So how did you get tied in with the school?
Me?
Yeah. Did you show up and say, hey, I can speak English, or?
Well, the hospital had, there was a couple that were missionaries that helped us get oriented, and they knew what my deal was, and so she made it happen. I can't remember, just introduced me to somebody that's connected at the hospital and said, you might want to go to this school. So, and they were so, I did nothing to really help them. It was more like an adventure for me. I mean, I tried to, but one day, it's like, oh, you teach these middle schoolers about sex education. I was like, what? They're like, oh, it's no problem. They're so used to it. We talk about AIDS all the time. I was like, okay, but what I contributed to them was nothing compared to what I got. They were wonderful, welcoming, and it was a very different kind of system too. Yeah. Another day we were out at one of those meetings, and somebody was being naughty, and they would cane the kids. The word wasn't caning, it was like a little piece of pipe that they would actually, hit them with. And they were like, here, Primo, you go cane that kid. I was like, no, we don't do that in my country. Like, why not? How do you get them to behave?
They don't.
Yeah, exactly. I didn't tell them that part.
What year was that? And do you have continued, contact with them? Is there any updates about the hospital, about the school?
Yeah, I wish there were. It was 2007-8, and shame on us. We really haven't kept up with it.
It kept up for a while, yeah. Yeah, and that was, the month we left, there was Kenyan elections, and that was when there was
the chaos.
A great deal of violence and chaos because the elections didn't go well, didn't go the way some people wanted. And the striking feeling you get in a developed country like this that's kind of on their way up a little bit is that it doesn't even take a great government for things to get better. It just has to not get in the way. There just has to be not a war going on and not a government that's stealing from everybody too much all the time, because everybody wants to get ahead. They're working hard as heck, and the economy is growing.
Yeah.
Well, that concludes our evening of talks, unless somebody has something that's just burning that they want to get up and share.
We have an update on the
The candidates left the building. They went to City Hall, and something's going to happen behind doors that I'm not allowed through. So in the meantime, we're going to mingle, rejoice in our democratic process, and stay as long as you want until Kathleen tells us to get the hell out of here because she wants to go home. So when they come back, I think they'll have the news. I don't really want to be the one to say the news, so look at them when they come back in. Andy, Carter, and Rick, in case you didn't know their first names. So, thank you very much.
There were 549 people who voted. Rick Clifford Chase is the mayor with 429 votes. Both Carter and Andy were over 300 votes apiece, and the next person, closest person, had like 130.
Thank you, Teo.
You heard it here first at Jasper's after Tipsy Talks. Carter and our new mayor, Rick Clifford Chase.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you, Heather.
Hi, Heather. Can I get a hug? Thank you for your support.
Gotta be the first to interview you.
I'm an elderwoman now, yes, officially.
Yes, sure. Half of our crowd.
Oh, like, yeah. What about like a little little hair fixture? Yes, I like a smaller one, appropriately sized for an alderwoman. Yes, thank you, thank you.
Very good listener, and I'm very proud of you.
Hey, I appreciate you. Thanks for helping.
Our pleasure. Helps you.
Yes.
NEK-TV, what do you have to say for yourself?
Congratulations to the new candidates, and it was a great run. I appreciate everybody that ran, came out and voted, showed their support, and looking forward to helping move the city in the forward direction.
We're very happy you're here.
Thank you. Glad to be here.